Okay, thank you.
I think we're good to go. My waiting room is now empty.
Okay, all right. That's fine, thank you. So I'm just going to hand over to Sharon and Cooper from Zimtrade. It'll be great if everyone switches off their videos because it's easier to, so that there's no interference. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. Thank you once again for inviting us to this webinar. I'm Sharon Chingonzo from Zimtrade. I'm an export promotion officer. So we're going to share a short presentation. Let me actually just share it on the screen right away. I don't know if you'd like my video on or I can keep it off.
No, please have your video on. That would be great so people can see who you are. And I do apologize. I've been calling you Sharon. It's actually Sharon.
Sharon.
Thank you.
It's
Thank
okay.
you for that. Mm-hmm.
It's okay. Okay, are you seeing anything on the screen yet?
Nothing yet.
Okay.
Yes, we can see the sunset.
Okay. Okay. All right. So it's good afternoon, actually. From our side, it's 12 midday now. So I know it's good morning for some of you. So as I said earlier on, I'm Sharon Chingonzo. I work for Zimtrade as an export promotion officer. I'm also joined by my colleague, Kupa Kwashemidzi, and we will take you through a short presentation about our services as Zimtrade and also opportunities that exist in the horticulture sector within the region, as well as in Europe and the UK. So without taking too much time, I will just get right into our presentation. So that's just a roadmap about what we are going to present today. Just a little bit about Zimtrade, and then we'll also share trade statistics between Zimbabwe's trade with the EU and the United Kingdom, as well as trading blocks, and the most important thing being the trade opportunities in Zimbabwe. So I'm sure most of you might be wondering what Zimtrade is. So Zimtrade is a trade promotion and development organization. And what our mandate really is to promote Zimbabwe's export growth. So that really is our core business. And the way we deliver this mandate is through certain services that we offer to our clients. Our clients mainly are potential exporters as well as current exporters. Those are the people that we deal with. Okay, and then, so in terms of delivering our mandate, as I said, we have certain services that we offer. And I'm just going to go through them right now. One of the services is market intelligence. And this is basically information regarding different markets that we give to our clients. And these can be in the form of market briefs, product profiles that we share across different sectors. That is, because we work with about 14 sectors, and horticulture is one of them, and one of the main ones, I must say. So this market intelligence is shared upon request, or also just generally on our social media platforms, on our newsletter, and other platforms as well. And within this market intelligence service that we offer, we carry out surveys, market surveys and market scans to enable us to better understand the markets that are in the region and elsewhere. So after having conducted these surveys, we get information that we then disseminate to our clients. So that's just some of the stuff that we do there within the market intelligence service part. And then we then have a process where we start we take an exporter, for example, if it's a potential exporter, one that is not quite ready for the export market yet, we take them through about 2 stages. So we have the export development stage, which is one of our services. In this specific service, what we do is we offer training and capacity building to potential exporters. Those that, as I said, aren't quite ready, we equip them with tools to enable them to be what we call export ready. And some of the trainings include, we have the flagship training called the Marketing and Branding for International Competitiveness. And that one consists of modules to do with packaging, export plans, developing of export plans, and other important things that will equip the potential exporter as they start their journey, their export journey. And then generally building capacity of SMEs and other organizations as we see fit. We also have technical interventions that are offered under this service, where we have at times experts that come in from the Netherlands and Germany who come through and share their expertise in different fields to then help companies operate more efficiently. So that's for export development. And once an exporter has then been taken through this process, we then go into facilitating market access, which is obviously very key. And that is within the export promotion service. So what we do when we're offering this service is, in terms of facilitating market access, we do it in with activities such as trade fairs and exhibitions. We conduct trade missions, which could be Zimtrade taking exporters out into the markets, whether it's the UK and Europe or within the region. So we do those outward seller missions as well as inward buyer missions. And this is all in a bid to facilitate this market access. And then generally at times, if it's not attending a physical trade fair, we also just arrange B2B meetings. We just match make companies that we see are best fit for each other and link them so that they can do business. So, which is obviously very key when you want to export. And then apart from that as well, the export promotion development and the market intelligence, we understand that the environment that we work in at times presents challenges. So we also do advocacy work. As we are a public-private partnership, we work closely with the private sector and the government, and we advocate issues that affect exporters in doing export business to the government. So we have issues that we table to the government for them to resolve so that exporters can have a better environment to really just work in and be successful as exporters. So in a nutshell, that really is what we do, but there's a whole range of services within these that I've said that are also tailor-made to SMEs, youth-led organizations, women-led organizations, many various programs that we have just to ensure that we as companies successfully export. So I think that is really what we do. I'm sure at the end you can always ask questions, and we will also share our numbers at the end of this presentation. But at this moment in time, I will then hand over to my colleague Kupa, who will then take you through on the opportunities as well as just general statistics on the horticulture sector. So over to you, Kupa.
Thanks, Sharon. I'm hoping that everyone here now understands what Zimtrade is all about. So one of the key aspects that she mentioned was on statistics and provision of market intelligence. And so I just figured that it might make a bit of sense to talk a little bit about, or to share information about Zimbabwe's major export destination within Europe, and as well our import sources, again, from the same trade bloc. So as you can see, these are the common, if I could say, top 10 major export destinations. So in terms of the ranking, it at times interchanges.
Sorry, Cooper. I don't know if it's just myself only, but I can only see Sharon's screen. I can't see your screen.
Okay, I can take over, because what we had done is it's the same presentation, but she had covered the introductory part, and then the important, the Zimtrade services, and then now just focusing on the statistics.
Yes, but for some reason, it just says Sharon's name on it. I can't actually see anything. I don't know whether it's just myself or other people.
It's yourself, actually. We can see clearly on my side.
Or maybe I can try and
we can see
clearly.
We can see.
So Yvonne, it could be your phone.
We can see your screen.
Okay, so can people see now, or Yvonne, can you see?
It's okay. Screen? I think I have too many screens opened on my laptop. I can see now. Thank you. So sorry, everyone.
Okay, that's fine. So as I was saying, I just figured I would share information about the major export destinations, and I was saying that in terms, this is just basically the top 10, and the ranking at times changes each year depending on the major export products. But the top destinations are, as you can see, Italy, Netherlands, UK, France, Belgium, Spain, Poland, Portugal, Hungary, and Germany. And then in terms of imports as well, you'll see that the top source of Zimbabwe's imports is UK and Germany. And in terms of the products that are actually, that we're importing the most from these two companies, I'm sure all of us can guess, it's mostly motor vehicles that are coming through from the UK and or Germany. And then as well, other equipment. Then in terms of the products, the slide is just basically showing that the top export product is tobacco, which is unmanufactured. And then you also have your minerals like your diamonds and chrome. And then obviously we then get into your fresh produce and your horticultural produce, which is your fresh, some of the aspects being your fresh or dried mangoes, fresh or chilled peas. You've got your tea, fermented tea, you've got your avocados and other products. And then in terms of imports, we have, as I mentioned, motor vehicles, we have vaccines, and then, you know, parts or machinery and equipment. And then if I may zero in particularly on the UK, this slide is just basically showing Zimbabwe's trade with the UK since 2009. And obviously 2009 being an important year to share, because that's the year that Zimbabwe dollarized. So as you can see on the slide, from 2009 up to 2011, we had a positive trade balance between Zimbabwe and the UK. And then 2012 up to 2015, we had a drop in terms of our exports, which obviously resulted in decline in the trade balance between the two countries. But then interestingly and positively, from 2016, this trade balance seems to have started on a positive trend. But then obviously, as you can witness again from the figures, this is owing to sort of like a twin strategy where we have managed our imports from the UK and also increased our exports. And then as you can see, in 2019, we imported, UK imported goods worth 90 million from Zimbabwe. And the major imports, you're looking at, I think of particular interest to the farmers here, you have peas, where we exported $7.5 million worth of peas. in 2019. And then we had black tea at 4.6 million, avocados at 2 million, and then tobacco at 2 million. And in terms of horticulture, I think it's an important sector that as Zimtrade and as a nation, we are focusing on to try and recover the sector. And other products that are not in the top 5 that I mentioned, we're also exporting oranges. You've got berries. I'm sure some of the farmers here can attest to the growing increase or growing interest in blueberry farming and raspberry and strawberries, especially targeting the European market and the UK market. These are some of the products that we believe actually have a lot of potential for exporting. We have issues like fine beans as well, chili peppers, stone fruits. We're also trying to come up with to develop a mushroom cluster, which again will try and target the European market, among many other products. Basically, this slide is just showing as well what I was just talking to in terms of the exports to UK in 2019 with the edible vegetables. Yes, we had the minerals. If you can see, out of the 90 million, unfortunately, we could say 67 million of that was actually minerals. And but this is particularly to the UK. But there's still a lot of potential in Zimbabwe where we can grow this number and increase the share of fresh produce that is being exported to the UK. Again, the slide is talking about the same thing in terms of this is in terms of what we are importing, from the UK. And as I mentioned, 60% of our imports in 2019 from the UK were actually motor vehicles. And then we do have machinery items, electrical machinery, some beverages, some plastic and pharmaceutical products. Now, getting into some of the opportunities, I figured it made a bit of sense to share information on the trading blocks that Zimbabwe is a signatory to. As some are, and I'm hoping all of us are aware, Zimbabwe, we're a member of COMESA, and basically COMESA offers a population of 400 million, and basically we can translate that into a potential market and a GDP of over 360 billion. And then we're also a member of SADC, which has a population of 277 million and a GDP of 431 billion. And then the recently talked about, or the recent famous AFCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a trading bloc which brings together all African countries, unlocking a potential of 1.25 billion in terms of population and GDP of 2.5 trillion. And then the EU, Zimbabwe is a member or a signatory to the Interim Economic Partnership Agreement, which unlocks again the EU market with a population of 270 million and a GDP of 431. And then I've put in there the EAC. Why I put the EAC is there is also talk and a lot of work happening on the development of what they're calling a tripartite free trade area, which brings together COMESA, SADC, and the EAC. So again, this will unlock a lot of potential in terms of potential markets. And then as well as Zimbabwe, it is important to note that we have bilateral trade agreements with these 4 countries in particular, which is Botswana, Malawi, Mozambique, and Namibia. And basically these bilateral trade agreements give us duty-free, quota-free access to these markets. Why this is so important for the farmers here and participants here to note is because of these bilateral trade agreements, we can then, when we're trying to export or unlock some of these markets, we don't have to pay some of the duties and the tariffs that other countries who are either not signatories to these, that don't have these bilateral trade agreements or are not signatories to either SADC or COMESA or the African Free Trade Area. It means that they will be charged higher duty. So that puts your produce or your products at a better place, at a better advantage, because then in terms of costs, I know the costs in terms of the doing business environment in Zimbabwe is an often talked about topic. But then if you then access these markets through these bilateral trade agreements, you'll find that you'll unlock indirect incentives, which will help you market your produce better. And then if I may get into trade opportunities by sector, the horticulture sector obviously being the most important sector for today. As from a Zimtrade point of view, we're seeing quite a growing demand in citrus produce. This is not just your oranges, you're looking at all the various citrus varieties, your oranges, your lemons, your mandarins, your limes and everything. And this demand, we're witnessing a lot of it from China and the Middle East. And most of it has also been because of if some of you might be aware of the greening disease, the Asian disease that affected their citrus industry. And as Zimtrade, we're also working on developing a citrus protocol, which would again help further unlock these markets in China and the Middle East. In terms of avocados, we're also witnessing a growing demand in Europe. It's considered a superfood. So obviously, superfood trend is a growing trend in Europe. And basically what a superfood is, it's a food that is regarded to have high nutrition value. And so avocados are one of them. And but then I think of importance to note is when we're dealing with some of these produce, we have to be careful in terms of the varieties now that we're growing for these markets. I can tell you for right now, for example, in terms of Europe, if you try to export those big avocados that we're all used to and love here in Zimbabwe, which are huge in size, you will not find a market for that in Europe. They have a particular variety that the Haas variety, that's HAAS, which is very small and sweet. So the issue of varieties is very important. I may talk of certain products here in broad terms. If I can give another example, peas. When we talk of peas to the UK and the Netherlands, we're not talking of our usual garden peas, you know, where you take off the shell and you eat the actual pea inside. There are particular varieties, your Munch 2 and sugar snap peas. Those are the particular varieties that will have a market in some of these countries. So it's important to then note or do research in terms of, or find more information when we say there's a demand for certain products, which varieties are we talking about? And then there's also a growing demand in Asia and Europe for macadamia nuts. This is being regarded as the golden nut. There's a lot of interest and it's attracting a lot of value and exports. And then, as I mentioned earlier, blueberries, there's a growing demand in Europe, also considered a superfood. And Zimbabwe, a lot of farmers are actually starting to look towards that route. And then in terms of peas, it's important to also note that as Zimbabwe, we're actually the second biggest supplier into the UK and Netherlands of the Munch 2 and sugar snap pea variety. And then there's also flowers or floriculture. And again, it's growing in demand in Europe. And there are certain open field varieties that are doing pretty well in Zimbabwe. And a little bit more in terms of information on the horticulture sector, particularly focusing on organic. Because organic produce actually unlocks a lot more value rather than just growing your fresh produce. And this market is projected to reach over 300 billion by 2025. And in the UK alone in 2019, it was worth over 2.5 billion euros. And we understand that about 200 million is spent each month on organic food and drinks in the UK. And it's been on a continuous growth trend for over 7 years now. And as Zimbabwe, we have a lot of potential because you'll find that in some of the areas actually in Zimbabwe and in some of the communities, owing to the challenges that most farmers, small-scale farmers especially, are facing in terms of cost of living, some of them can't even afford to buy your chemicals. So they end up finding natural means to grow some of these produce. So then that obviously translates to organic production of some of this fresh produce. But then it's also important to note that it then needs to be certified organic for it to unlock this potential. Because otherwise, if it's just a word of mouth, then there's no point. Then another important aspect, which is related to farming, that I thought I would share is there's a developing interest again, owing to particularly to the significant number of African diasporans in Europe. So there's a growing interest in Afrocentric foods. And some of the examples worth noting are your bambara beans, which is your nyimo, your baobab powder, moringa tea, and mopane worms, or macimbi or madora, as some of you may know them. And then obviously when you talk of farming, one important aspect, and as Zimtrade, it's also an area that we're very interested in, is value addition. And from a farming point of view, the way you can then value add is through agro-processing. And we are witnessing that there's a lot of potential in terms of avocado processing. Particularly, you can look at issues like avocado oil. Macadamia processing, again, you can press the nuts and express oil from the macadamia nuts. And then aspects of fruit drying and packaging and canning as well. And when you add value, you unlock a lot of value and a lot of you can gain more in terms of your pricing when you then add a little bit more value to it. And then in terms of regionally, as Zimtrade, I think as Sharon mentioned, we do a lot of surveys, and we've done quite a number of surveys in these countries where we have basically, and we understand that these markets are basically ready for agricultural produce. You've got your Mozambique, Tanzania, Angola, DRC, Namibia, Malawi. And as Zimtrade, what we're also trying to do is we're trying to take it a step further in not just carrying out these surveys, but also trying to establish bilateral relations with some of these countries to then unlock this potential more directly. So for example, with some of the countries, we've actually gone into some form of informal agreement where we understand or they share with us their annual demands in terms of fresh produce or agricultural produce. And obviously the idea now behind that is that as Zimbabwean producers or Zimbabwean growers, we can then know what is demanded in which country at which time or at which particular month. Obviously that unlocks more value in terms of how much you can sell your produce in these respective markets, and as well how easy it would be to access this market. I know from the reverse point of view with Zimbabwe, I understand that in terms of onions, as an example, I think it should be starting around February. We start experiencing a lot of shortages, and then we start witnessing a lot of imports. So by the same argument, we are trying to now unlock the same with some of these countries where we understand where their shortages are in which months, and then we try to link potential growers or farmers with these countries and respective potential buyers. And I thought I would bring Angola, the Angolan case in particular, to everyone's attention. Why? Because it's a very huge market. You can see in 2018, Angola imported their total import bill was about 16.4 billion. But what's interesting to note, most of Angola's products and even fresh produce is coming all the way from Portugal and some of your South American countries, and not from Zimbabwe. And in the same year, we only exported 783,000 worth of goods, but we are in the same region. We are signatories to similar trading blocks, which, as I mentioned, unlocks a lot of potential for us in terms of exporting to these countries. But these are some of the products that I actually import from as far as Portugal. You've got your pork products, your processed foods, your dairy products, poultry and eggs. And we had a buyer from Angola beginning of this year. And what's sad is when we took them through and even them getting to taste some of the Zimbabwean products, they were surprised that one, Zimbabwe still produces products or produce that is so amazing in taste and quality. But at the same time, for us, we are not tapping into that potential market. So I think I would like to present this as a challenge as well to all the farmers that are here to look towards Angola as a potential market. So I think this comes to the conclusion. And basically, I think important aspects that we need to take note of is, yes, we can talk about exports, and everything that we've said is important, but if we are not competitive, we will not be able to gain access into these markets. So it's very important as we do as we produce, we need to produce efficiently and effectively, and manage our costs and make sure that we'll be competitive in the respective markets that we'll be trying to target. And another important aspect, and I'm happy, I hope Clarence has managed to join, an issue of compliance to regulatory requirements and voluntary standards. In some of these markets that, especially when you're looking at the EU, you will never be able to unlock those potential markets if you're not compliant to some of the certifications. And I'm hoping Clarence will be able to shed more light on that. And we also need to develop strong value chains that are geared for exports. At times, I'm hoping that some of us, or most of us here, understand Shona, but I think there's an older adage that goes, "Charachimwa Chwanyinda." And basically what we're trying to, obviously what the elders were trying to prove there is, at times, if you want to conquer certain things, you need to do it as a group. And when it comes to produce, and especially when you're exporting, issues of consolidation are very important. So you'll never conquer a market alone. Some of the demands of some of these markets will never, even the biggest farmer in Zimbabwe will never be able to satisfy that market on their own. So instead of trying to go at it alone, if you unlock a potential market, it's always good to try and rope in a couple of colleagues and consolidate your orders and your produce. And another important aspect is on research and growing for the market. I think one aspect that a lot of farmers miss is we grow produce and then start to look for the market after we have the produce. We at Zimtrade, we believe that's not the best way to go for it. You search for the market, you grow for the market, you start from the market basically, and then you go backwards and you work backwards and grow what the market needs. Otherwise, you end up with produce in your field and nowhere to sell it. And we also need to promote products in the region and improve the ease of doing export business. As Zimtrade, we will work on that. And if you ever face any challenges that are affecting your doing business, please feel free to come through to Zimtrade. We'll find a way to assist you. It could be issue of licensing and compliance. We'll always find a way to assist you. And we also need to leverage on the existing trade agreements. And we also need to make use of resources being offered by various development cooperation partners. I'm happy Sharon touched on the issue of the senior expert organizations like your POOM from the Netherlands and SES from Germany. And we also need to look at market diversification. So for those who will have time, even after the webinar, that is our website. You'll find a lot of important and interesting material there, and our contact details are also there on that website. Please feel free to log in. We also have a live chat platform where you can get responses in real time. And then those are our contact details. I think that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Hi.
Hello?
Hello, sorry. I'm just waiting for the host to let me start my video. Just want to say thank you so much to Sharon, and thank you to Cooper for just a wonderful presentation. It was amazing because you've covered everything. I've attended a lot of Zimtrade sessions, but this really went into detail. So I'm hoping it's recording, so we'll be able to send out the presentations, but I'm also hoping that you've all taken something from this presentation. I mainly liked what you mentioned about, you know, how you can help. I think Charachimachi Tswanyinda. We need to work together as farmers because to meet the demands for, let's say, we're shipping to Europe or to the United Kingdom, the quantities that are required are just humongous. And so it's important for us to work together I've taken people's contact details. Obviously, you had to register before you came in, so we'll be in touch. But also amongst yourselves, you're welcome to start something on your own. And that's what, a lot of farmers that are currently doing blueberries, they come together as blueberry farmers. Okay, sorry, I'd been muted a minute ago. So yes, as I was saying, we need to come together. One of our speakers is Clarence Male, as Cooper mentioned. He was supposed to be here, but he's actually auditing a farm, and he's saying that the internet is not working properly. So we're having problems with connecting with him, but he's sending us audios for you, for him to be able to answer some of the questions, how to get Global Gap certification. And what are the requirements and how long does the process take? So we're hoping that he'll send his information in a few minutes. But before I publish Clarence information, there's a lot of questions. Can I just ask you to unmute yourselves or raise your hand actually, and then we'll let you ask a question to Sharon or Cooper before they go. Okay, I've got Mepo. Okay, I think I know who this is. I've got my colleague, TSG. He would like to speak, so I'll let you continue, TSG.
Thank you very much, Sister Yvonne. It's good to know that you know that it's me straight away.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Midzi. So you presented some very interesting stats about Angola importing from Portugal. But isn't that firstly to do with the fact that Angola was a Portuguese colony, and therefore then they'll probably have bilateral agreements which make it such that a lot of these former colonists will tend to go and be importing foods and goods from those countries. I think that's the first. Then the second one's more looking at regional trade in terms of us as Zimbabwean farmers trying to access that market. Because I think, a market that's, if you're looking at market valuation, about 16.9 billion is what you said. It's quite substantial, and there was a lot of room for other people to enter. How much is actually being done by the Zimbabwean government, I guess, through Zimtrade to actually help farmers to access those markets? The reason why I'm asking that is because I think, having been farming for quite a little bit myself, I've seen, and let's just say, for example, this year, there is a lot of farmers who've got cabbage crop in their field that is now being sold to livestock for feed, which actually could have been exported to Angola if people were aware of this and a bit more was being done by the government to actually support. That's my questions.
Okay, Cooper, I don't know whether you and Sharon would love to answer that.
Thanks, Yvonne. I think, thank you for those questions. The first one about Angola. The reason why I decided to put it there, first and foremost, is to point out, as I mentioned, that there's a lot of potential with that market. And yes, you're right. Most of that, particularly them importing from Portugal, could be obviously because of them being a Portuguese former colony. And unfortunately, another aspect that I would then share with regards to that is, for example, it actually is cheaper for one to export from Zimbabwe to Europe than it is for you to export to Angola. And now what this speaks to is an issue of intra-African trade and some of the, like, for example, logistical challenges that exist and the high costs that exists in terms of intra-African trade. And as well now in trying to then respond to your then second question in terms of what government is doing, and Sharon will then expand on that, is what we are trying to do now is well, not just us as Zimtrade, but to try and address some of these costs and logistical challenges that are affect a lot of farmers or potential exporters in general in trying to tap into and or access the regional markets, because in terms of the goodwill that is there, as I mentioned, we had a buyer, we had a team that went to Angola for the market survey in 2019, and their feedback in terms of the reception and basically how they regard as Zimbabwe, we still have a lot of goodwill in some of these regional colleagues of ours, but then we are not doing enough to access these markets. And obviously when we then come back with this feedback, we then share it with the government, and they are then trying to identify ways to grow these relations or to tap into these relations through, from their point of view. Obviously it then becomes an issue of political diplomacy and stuff like that. But I think I'll hand over to Sharon to expand more on that and touch on your second question.
Okay, so in terms of what the government is doing specifically to promote trade in general, not just for the horticulture sector, but all the other sectors, is that the bilateral agreements that are being signed, first of all, there are ones that are in place. I think in the presentation, we touched a bit on some of them. Those ones enable exporters to access markets with their products going in duty-free and as well as tariff-free. And specifically for the UK, there's an interesting development in that there are negotiations between the Zimbabwean government as well as the UK government in signing a bilateral trade agreement. As we all know that there's Brexit, and Britain is looking for into signing new trade agreements. So that is actually on the cards. And once that is signed, Zimbabwean products will then also be able to enjoy these duty-free and tariff-free arrangements, so that their produce then is more competitive when it gets into the market. So really the government is trying to be as open as possible to allow trade to be as liberal as possible, and for us as Zimbabweans to access markets that we normally would not be able to access. So I could say that is really what they're doing. And especially with the UK, I think that is a very great development. So once I think all is signed, you will see that you'll be able to now use that as an access point into the UK market, which we initially were not able to. I hope that answers your question.
Partially, I think the focus was mainly on talking about the UK. I'm more a believer in intra-Africa trade, if I'm honest. But however, I think what I'll do is I'll take your details and we're gonna have a conversation afterwards to try and get a bit more understanding for myself. But thank you very much for the response.
Sure, you're welcome.
Okay, I think there was a second person that actually wanted to ask a question. I can't find them now. They had their hand raised. But I've got somebody, I think I only have your telephone number. It's 077, oh, okay, 07703687944. If you want to ask your question, please. Thank you. Oh, first of all, before the 077, it was Tapiwa Majaka who wanted to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Farm Life, for organizing this interesting and insightful session. Part of my question was actually touched on by Mepo and the answers thereof, but what I still find unanswered, we have these trade agreements, we have this connection that we talk of SADC, we talk of COMESA, and you are still talking of government to government arrangements. Is that not being covered adequately at the level of COMESA? And now you are even talking of link up with EAC. Would you be able to shed more light on that? Because what I'm finding is we have these groupings. Are they just groupings where people go and have tea and coffee? or there are groupings where people are really opening ways for more interactions? Thank you.
Should we go back to Sharon and Cooper on that one, please? We will have to be really fast because our other speaker has to speak because they're at work, so and then they'll need to go back. So we can always ask our questions. I think Sharon and Cooper will still be around. But yes, please go ahead. And then after Sharon and Cooper have answered Tapiwa's question, Stuart and then Anonymous 1 will then ask. And then afterwards, I'll close the session, let the other person speak. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yvonne. And thanks, Tapiwa, for that question. I think one way I can respond to that is what happens with these trade agreements or the trading blocks. For example, maybe I'll respond this and give two particular examples. If you might be aware, or if you might recall, Zimbabwe had a bilateral trade agreement between Zimbabwe and South Africa, right? And that came to a close 2013, and South Africa decided not to renew that. And basically what their message was was, we're not renewing it because we'll then stick to SADC trade agreement, right? That's one example. That's one country's point of view. Then you look at countries like, I'll give Malawi, for example. So with Malawi, it's a unique country. Well, not one of the few, it's Malawi, I think, in Zimbabwe. I mean, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia, where they are members of SADC and COMESA. We're all members of SADC and COMESA, but we also, between Zimbabwe and Malawi, have that bilateral trade agreement. So why those trade agreements then remain relevant is we have sector-specific recommendations or incentives or benefits, so to speak, which then accrue, which they might be better off from the Zimbabwe-Malawi bilateral trade agreement. But from a SADC trade agreement, those incentives do not exist because they're looking at the interests of the whole bloc, not just a particular competitive advantage or disadvantage between two countries. So I'll give you an example that in some certain aspects of the processed food sector, it's actually more beneficial to export using the bilateral trade agreement between Zimbabwe and Malawi than it is for you to use either SADC or COMESA. So now you'll find that this actually is the case with a lot of these various trade bilateral versus either COMESA and SADC, where some companies will still prefer either to go the SADC route or the COMESA route or the bilateral route, simply because it then offers different benefits compared to the other three. So they'll still remain relevant rather than trying to stick to one agreement.
Okay, Stuart, can you quickly ask your question and then Anonymous 1? Thank you. And Max Moore, can you switch off your video? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Yvonne. I've just been looking where to find where Zimtrade should be helping us. For example, the local market in our neighboring countries. Is there any help we can get to penetrate that market other than on government-to-government level, where there's a lot of protocol involved, which can deter or delay any export for our products? Is there any way we can work out as a private entity into that market?
Yes, most definitely, Stuart. Thank you for the question. Most definitely. As I had earlier said, we work with the private sector as well very much. So it really depends on the type of products that you are producing. We can tailor make our services also to even suit your specific organization. So really, in short, to answer your question, we can do that, and we can discuss further what exactly it is that you produce, and then thereafter we will be able to assess where exactly you are in terms of exporting, and then we're able to give you the service that is best suited for you. But we can most definitely do that, so you can definitely be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies. Anonymous one, can you ask your question, please? Thank you. That's all I have. Unfortunately, I don't have a name for anonymous one. Thank you. Was there anyone else wanting to ask a question?
Hello.
There's Emmanuel Sitole.
Okay. Oh yes, Emmanuel. Yes, he had said.
Oh, hello. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. You talked of the Afrocentric foods, stuff like baobab tree and baobab fruit. I'm sorry. And is there any way you can help over that side before it's exported to do a chemical analysis? Because for testing like stuff like iron, the level of iron, because like here in the UK, it is very expensive to endeavor on that. I even tried it myself, despite having some scientists as friends. It was just way out of reach to be viable. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So I think I would mention two major organizations that would be important on that aspect. The first one is the Plant Quarantine and Research Institute, which basically would give you a phytosanitary certificate, which basically gives information or confirms that there are no toxic or ingestible, so to speak, chemicals or residues in that product. And then, but also maybe I think partly as well in terms of your question, you're talking about the issue of nutritional content. And that research or analysis can be done by the Standards Association of Zimbabwe. So it's very possible to do that analysis here in Zimbabwe.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to ask Anonymous one, if that's okay, if you could share your, yes, please share with us. So that's the person with the telephone number 07703 687944. Thank you. I'm not so sure where they've gone to, but I'll let Lucia and Barley ask their questions next. So Lucia, if...
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yes. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that, and thank you for organizing this. Sorry, I joined late. Yes, my question is to Zimtrade, just to find out about the local representation within Zimbabwe. For example, we have quite a number of rural farmers who could be producing some of these products for export. And maybe it's the guidance of where to go. For example, a farmer in Binga, a farmer in Mrewa, a farmer in Kezi, where should they go in terms of advice of how to export? That's one of the questions. And then the second question is, in terms of the international standards, the quality standards, how are people assisted in order to meet these standards of exporting their products? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. So for issues to do with export, you could come to us. We try to provide a one-stop shop, so to speak. So we are one organization that you can come to when you're looking for information on how to start your export journey. Because as I said, we deal with potential and current exporters. And then maybe other organizations, you've got your agricultural marketing authority. That one also is also an organization that could give you information where, and then you also register as an agro dealer once you're a producer, because that is required. It's a requirement when you're exporting. So those are just some of the organizations. And then other ones are just, I think, more of the local ones, your farmers associations. But you could come to us, and if there are things that might not be within our purview, we will definitely give information on the relevant authorities to contact. Yeah, I hope that's clear, Lucia.
I'm gonna have to cut people short. Bali and Savannah, anonymous one, can I ask you to ask your questions after this presentation, because our buyer needs to go back to work. So Cooper and Sharon will still be here. Can I also ask Brighton and Jeopardy, Chineka, to switch off your videos? Thank you. Okay. Actually, maybe let Bali ask his question whilst our speaker for our buyer, the speaker that's speaking next, is getting ready. They need to be allowed to share their screen, so they're just getting ready. And then after Bali, and then no more questions, I'll ask Savannah, anonymous one, to ask his question later, if that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Yvonne, and thanks for having this platform to share. We have a family homestead near Wonde Valley, and we've been very impressed with the sharings of Nespresso and the coffee platforms that they're creating for people to be able to get back into the coffee industry. I didn't see much to share on the coffee on Cooper's slides. Can you speak a bit to that from a feasibility perspective, given the fact that coffee used to do really well in the 80s and now not so much?
Thanks, Bali. Actually, I think I hope you will allow me to actually use your introduction to your question as the response. The Nespresso story is actually quite a very interesting one, and for some of the farmers, I hope there are some farmers or guys with farming interests in the UK. I'm hoping you might have come across this Nespresso coffee that Bali is talking about, called Tamukam Zimbabwe. So it's one interesting story that we pride ourselves as Zimbabwe, and it's actually an area that is growing again in interest in terms of growth of coffee in Zimbabwe. As you may know, that I think most of that had since shifted to tea production, but because of that interest now from some of these groups, even if you visit some of the local shops, you can now get your freshly ground coffee or your coffee beans even in the local shops, and that basically is a signal or an indication that that sector is coming back up in Zimbabwe.
Bali, was that okay? Was your question answered?
I think more my question is like, is it feasible, given the fact that like coffee worked well and it backed out in the 80s and there was limited government support, the value of coffee plunged, there wasn't much support. Like, is it still a good idea to get into it now? Because I'm seeing the signal from the Nespresso situation, but there's hesitation even in the Wonde Valley region to really jump onto this, given the fact that they saw it as a big thing in the 80s and then it tanked later on. Is there a good signal here for investment from a farmer's perspective?
Bali, I'm going to answer that. There's a farmer in Rwanda at the moment who started producing his own coffee, adding value to it. and then selling it to the European markets. So it's not just coffee that's coming out of the African continent and going as just the coffee pods themselves, but actually going as something that's added value. I think there's always an appetite for something new, something different, or something that's been there before, but is now being done in a more innovative way. The Nespresso story tells you that there is an appetite for coffee. But it's obviously, it's who jumps on the bandwagon first and gets the good deals, I guess.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
I'm just going to stop the questions now. I'm going to let Farmer B, who's also a buyer, continue with her presentation because she really needs to go back to work. So she's really taken time out to speak to us. So thank you and welcome, Farmer B. Thank you. So over to you, Farmer B.
I hope everyone can hear me.
Farmer William, can I let Farmer B start before you?
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I was saying good afternoon, good evening, good morning to wherever you are around the world. Thank you, Cheryl, for inviting us on this platform. And really apologize for coming on late, and I was just going to be as brief, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions. Later on, people can contact me via the, I'll get some any questions via the Cheryl. So I'm here to just talk briefly about procurement, global procurement, and my aspect of knowledge is within the UK market. So my name is Benetta Gugotsi. I'm based in the UK, and I've been working in the food industry for over 14 years here in the UK. I've got experience in producing, in manufacturing, in retailing, and auditing as well. So I hope I'll be able to share a bit of my knowledge and help each other as a family. So sorry, I'm trying to move my slide. Okay. Can you all see you can still see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So basically, as a buyer, the factors that, or the questions that we consider or we ask ourselves when we're looking at the suppliers. So there's so many factors, and I've just tried to pick just a few. So we look at the market size of the size of the market. So if you supplying coffee, tea, avocado, sweet potatoes, citrus, just to mention a few. So what are the determining factors is the monetary value of those of those commodities. So we know that, for example, avocado and paprika, they call a big market value. So this when as a buyer, when we approaching such commodities, these are some of the factors that we look. What is the value of the commodity that we are buying? We also look at the prices. So so for anything that we are buying which has got a market value of $20 per kilo, or 20,000 US dollars per metric ton, we then considered to be very expensive. So with that consideration, we then look at what other factors can affect, can influence that price. So we've got, so if we consider a product to be very expensive, it automatically gets what we call risk rating in the buying classes. So we've got a high risk product, medium risk, and a low risk. So if it's an expensive, we consider that it to be expensive, then we consider it to be a high risk. And then so we also compare these commodities. We don't just come up with the price. So each region or each country, each commodity will command a different price. So we also then compare with the same commodity being bought in from another country, from another region. So so that's how we come up with this comparison to give that rating of expensive or not expensive, and also of agreeing the market, the buying prices. We also look at trading properties. So for example, if you are selling a product, unfortunately I missed a few earlier slides from Zimtrade where they were talking about further processed commodities that can be sold on the market. So we look at like chili and paprika, for example. When we're selling it on the international market, it's the color intensity of that chili commands a price. That's why you find there has been so much adulteration with spices, where they would put certain one dye to make it more red, more intense, so it commands a better value. So those are some of the commodities that we're looking at. So if, for example, maybe if people are supplying cocoa, you look at cocoa powder, you look at the cocoa solids, that's what commands the value of your product. Or if you have any product that requires, you're making a claim of protein value, so that again requires a certain price. So by that having that claim or that extra trading property, the price is different and is treated different and is pushed onto the medium high category. And then the other factor is the geographic location. So these, we're talking of country of origin. So there are certain factors as a buyer which are out of our control. We can choose, we are able to choose and select any supplier, but we do not have the luxury to choose country of origin. For example, we want to buy mangoes or pineapples. In the UK, we do not, we might be able to choose any supplier, like I said, but because of the country of origin and the nature or the place where that product grows well, we are forced to look at those hot countries, tropical countries. Hence, then it forces us to look outside of the Europe. And for example, I've given them the mango. It will force us to look at Zimbabwe, for say, or any African countries. So our country of origin we don't have the luxury to look at that. So we've got some determining factors, or there is what we call a global a food security index that has listed countries' performance. So there's so many factors that determines that geographic, or that determines the country of origin. So we'll then look at political instabilities within that country, what food safety and food quality the knowledge or information do we have for those countries. So if you're able to go on this link, it gives you an indication also on how countries are rated on the global market in terms of their origins, all these factors that I said, how food is readily available in a country. If a country is able to produce for itself, for example, the prices or either they need to adulterate the food or to it's less, or any other political influences are less when there's more availability of food. Whereas if you then look at third countries where food is considered to be a bit scarce, it will then forces, or the buyers will then look at considering factors such as such as the prices where the food is coming from, or the commodity is coming from. Is it being produced in an ethical way? Has the product been stolen, or all these other factors will come in terms of political instability, and also more so the food safety of the country. Does the country has food safety legislation or laws that promotes their local producers to produce safe and quality food? And then we also got seasonal availability. So if, for example, we are looking at, in the UK, we're looking at buying apples, for example, if they're within season, or onions, if they're within season, within Europe or within the UK, the price is less. But when it comes to end of season and we want to have the continuous supply, we then have to look at other countries. So again, that also pushes the price of the commodity on the market. And then it also then pushes the risk high. So seasonal availability also plays a part as a buyer, as one of our considering factors. And then I think that from a buyer's perspective, it is always best practice to source your commodity direct from source, so direct from a supplier. With so many factors, you avoid a lot of mishaps along the way, and it reduces your supply chain. So the product or ingredient or material can be sourced directly from a business manufacturer, or a grower, a slaughter, or a distributor. And then it gets more complex when you're looking at importers, traders, wholesalers, or retailers. So the first point of contact when we're looking at suppliers, we would prefer a direct source. And so if you're sourcing from a direct supplier, so the risk rating for that particular supplier will be considered low. Whereas if we are sourcing it from a broker or from a trader, then the risk rating is considered higher. So once you have that higher risk rating, it automatically brings in other factors which most buyers try to avoid. And you will see as I go down that why buyers prefer to source directly from supplier. So again, so this brings down to the complexity of the supply chain. So as a buyer, when you're considering when we are buying, we also look at the supply chain. So a supply chain is all the stages you move from a farm, who is a primary producer, to your point of sale as a buyer, whether a manufacturer or as a retailer. So all the other stages that are in between are considered a supply chain. So you've got your farmer, you've got your processors, or when they harvest the crops, the animals, whatever it is. So that's another part of the chain, right up to the point where we receive it as a manufacturer, and then we do further processing, or as a retailer, then they sell it in the supermarkets. So the shorter the supply chain, the less the risk, therefore the lower the risk rating. The longer the supply chain, the higher the risk rating. I'll give you an example. So if you're a supplier, as a buyer, if I want to buy some mangoes, dried mangoes, for example, this is considered as a short supply chain because I can go to a mango drying facility who source his or her mangoes from locally grown mangoes. So I hope you understand that the chain is from a grower, a local grower, local processing site, and a local buyer. So the chain is short. So as the chain is short, the risk is lower. And then we've got, when we move to complex supply chains now, which involves different business handling, processing, storing, and transporting. So for most imported products, the minute they are imported, they're considered as a complex supply chain. Hence why, as a as a farmer, you will only have control of your produce or your product up to the time you hand over to the logistic companies or to the couriers. So once it's out of your hands, you have no control of what is happening in between. Likewise, as a buyer, we will only have control when we receive that product from farmer A. We've received your dried mangoes, for example. You've decided to ship your mangoes or to sell those dried mangoes to the UK. When we receive it, that's only when we start having control. Anything that happens, whether from the port, if you're sending by sea or you're sending by air, we have no control of it. So there are possibilities of adulteration, any other source that comes with it. So hence the risk of the complexity is given a higher risk for most imported produce. And then, so the other factors that we look at is easy access of your product. So once you then, like I said on point number 6, the first point, we look at direct source, which is the best source. Secondly, you look at the complexity of our supply chain. This then brings into the factors that I'm now bringing in is accessibility of your material. So this brings in food fraud. So it brings in a factor of food fraud. So like once you have put your dried mangoes on the, you have handed over to the courier. Maybe as a supplier, you're selling your mangoes as sun-dried mangoes. So as a buyer, I'm expecting to receive mangoes which are sun-dried, which have those attributes which we would have agreed prior to purchase. So before we purchase, we agree on our specifications. So if they have those certain characteristics, that's what I'm looking for. So if then once you transport it, you don't have control of what's happening, there are possibilities, chances that your product can be substituted by maybe mangoes that have been dried in the oven, that have been dehydrated. Now that's a different process to your sun-dried mangoes, which you are selling and having a better value of money than the ones that you dehydrate in the ovens or in the factory. They would be calling for different market value. So as a farmer, you need to be able to have systems in place, securities in place, know your logistics, know your service providers, the transporters, the couriers. So a system that safeguards or mitigates some of these risks that farmers or suppliers can face is ensuring you've got your vehicles or your trucks or your containers, you've got seals on them. You're maintaining your serial numbers. You fax email to your buyer that this is my consignment. These are the serial number you'll be expecting. These are my quantities as well. There's substitution by quantities. So you might be supplying 20 tons, 20 tons of dried mangoes. Yes, we will receive 20 tons of dried mangoes, but they could have been substituted by something else in there. So you need to make sure that everything is in place. And this is one of our legal requirements in the European law of EU Regulation 1978 of 2002 on Article 18. It requires all producing companies from farm to fork, so from farmer right up to the retailer who are selling their products. They're all supposed to be able to trace their produce. So you're supposed to trace, I have sent 10 tons of mangoes to Morrison's or to Tesco's or to whoever distributor you're sending to. And you're supposed to be able to trace back that I received 10 tons of mangoes from farmer A, B, C, D, E. So that's very handy it's very useful, especially when you want to supply to the European market. And then, so I have touched on the adulteration. So these are the factors as well that, so once, as I take from this group, most of the farmers, if you're supplying whole and processed produce, let's say you're supplying, I'll keep going back to mango, or I can talk about chilies. You're supplying your whole chilies. It is a bit difficult to substitute a whole chili or a whole product. But once you then start to process it, or you're saying I'm supplying a dried or powdered chili or flaked bed eye chili. So that's, you start getting challenges, or you need to have further stop gates in place to show that what you are saying you're supplying is it's what the buyer is receiving. Because once you crush your bed eye chili, an ordinary person cannot tell that this is bed eye chili or this is a normal crushed chili flakes. So you need to have systems in place, and it's easier to substitute those there's so many adulterants out in the market to substitute. So here I've given an example of honey. So honey, chili, you've got oils. If you're making claims of oils, let's say, for example, you're saying you're supplying olive oil or sunflower oil, you need to be able to support your claim to say, this is what I'm supplying. It is sunflower oil, and this is what you're getting, sunflower oil. So it comes back to the testing, which and a previous participant has questioned, how do we do these testings? And it is important to have such testings to safeguard yourself, because you do not want to supply a tonnage, a metric tons of chilies, only for a buyer to receive, do their further authenticity test, and condemn the whole shipment load, because the cost is on you. And it also goes on a database, and you go on a register, so it brings to you a bad name against yourself or your company. And then we've got, sorry. So again, this is on adulteration. So the reason why I'm pushing this adulteration, it is as we are moving, one presenter spoke about how we are moving from Brexit. And not only Brexit, COVID has changed the dynamics of food safety a lot. The UK prides itself in the food law, in the stringency of the food law, which is why there are so many talks about Boris wanting to bring in American food. Americans, they allow GMO food in America, but in the UK we do not allow that. So there are so many talks about food law, and UK prides itself on its food safety law, which is the fundamental, the basis of all the European food law. It was developed based on the UK Food Safety Act of 1990. So with what's happening currently, there are we are seeing quite an increase in commodities which are being adulterated. So adulteration does not just mean putting something else in there. We had an example of one supplier in Asia who was supplying peppercorns. You would ask, why would someone want to supply black pepper? It's very cheap, but it's sold in bulk. Like I said, if you remember the first point, the value is in the material. So the more bulk it is, it's going to command more money. So that particular consignment was not adulterated by any fake substitute, but it was because of pesticide residues. So there are prohibited pesticides which are not allowed, which were not allowed to be used for that particular crop, but they went ahead and used it. So they couldn't supply directly to the UK market. They sent it via Vietnam, and then it came to the UK. So when it got to the UK and they did those pesticides tests, it was traced back that actually the country of origin of that consignment was from Thailand, I think, and the whole consignment was rejected. So there's so many substitutions and adulterations that we need to consider. So the best, or as a buyer, we always want to buy in wholesomeness as a whole product to minimize the chances of adulteration. But there are times where you cannot avoid that. And then we move on to when we then look at product claims. So there are people, so as people are becoming more health conscious, more environmental conscious, we are making quite a few product claims, and there is a demand of those claims. We've got halal claims, organic claims, non-GMO claims for those farmers who are growing animals, so grass-fed cattle, free-range chicken, fair trade bananas. What do we understand this claim? So we need to be able to understand the claims, and we need to be able to prove that the claim that we're making is what we make, because it comes at a cost to make these claims, and you would not want to send your free trade bananas or your free-range cattle-fed, grass-fed cattle, which most of our cattle in Zimbabwe, they are grass-fed, and it's a pride that, you know, in the UK when they advertise them, if you have seen Allah food or Allah dairy milk advert on telly, where you see cattle in the field, it's a happy claim, and everyone wants to associate with those environmental friendly practice. So, and it comes at a cost. So you would not want to say you are supplying a grass-fed cattle when by the time it gets here, someone has access to your consignment, substituted it with something else, and it gets rejected, or someone else substitute, you're selling what you think it's a grass-fed, and someone else is already taking your produce. So we need to be safeguarding in terms of our security. And also when we make these claims, we need to be sure that what we're claiming is what we're producing, and you need to keep current with the certification. And also as a buyer, or as a supplier, or as a producer, you need to be honest when we are making these claims. Are you able to maintain such claims? Because of good practice, I wish, I think Clarence, someone was supposed to talk about certification of Global Gap. When you make, when you commit to such claims, you need to be able to financially support and maintain that certification, because you do not want, substitution does not only come from outsiders. Even you as a producer, there are temptations that you might be driven to substitute your grass-fed animals or grass-fed cattle or your free-range cattle to the ones you're growing in the barn, to just make up the volumes, because pressures might come in. So those are some of the considerations you need to make. And then we look at the vendor's history. So we look at our data. There is a database of suppliers.
Sorry, Farmer B. Can I give you another 5 minutes?
Yes.
We've gone over our time.
Sure.
So yeah, okay, thank you.
So you look at the vendor's reputation. This is always good to have if you are supplying, to try and maintain that your audits, to try and maintain your relationship with the supplier. If, for example, you have things going wrong on your farm, be open. So there's nothing bad for a buyer to be hit by surprises. But if you open and prepare, then it's always good to have. And then we look at supply chain audits. So this, before we even look at engaging with a supplier, we then look at what kind of audits do you have? Audits like if you're in the UK, BRC. If you're outside, we look at food. FSSC or ISO 22000, we look at Global Gap, and these give that confidence to a buyer. If you already have this certification, it gives us confidence, and then we review the non-conformances, and then from those non-conformances, it can either trigger for a buyer to come physically on site to do their audits, or take what the certifications, what the outcomes of the audit, and accept to do business with yourself, with the supplier. And then these are other questions that we ask. Is the supplier of a material subject to relevant audits? So the most audit that we consider on a global platform, they have to be Global Food Safety Initiated benchmarked. So GFSI benchmarked, which is our ISO 22000 is GFSI benchmarked, which is our FSC 22000 BSI benchmark, IFS Global Gap. It's also GFSI accredited. I think that's all I have. Yeah. Hello?
Yes, thank you so much. I am so sorry to rush you, but I'm so glad that you touched slides 6 and 7, that you touched on the benchmarking and how it works with the private standards, because that's what Clarence Mwale was supposed to share with us, which I'm actually not going to share on the group anymore. I'll send them out as individual, because he sent a video and he sent an audio explaining. But I've sent a link to a form that each person is supposed to then put in their email address. And if you put your telephone number, it's even easier, because then I'll just WhatsApp you the video and the link with everything else that we're supposed to send to you. Sorry, I sound like I'm in a rush. We are in a way, but I just want to say thank you to our buyer, because she's given us inside information that you need to know why certain products will be rejected. And I think traceability is a very big issue within the United Kingdom. Or people, I did some research in Zimbabwe, people diluting milk, for example, with water. And that would not be acceptable if you're saying it's whole milk, you know. So traceability and adulteration as well is a major issue. I can't even pronounce that word, but yeah, it's a major issue, and we need to know these standards when we're thinking of going into supplying international markets. But
sorry,
doesn't mean that we need to be scared. You know, or it seems like it's a lot. It's not. It's not a lot at all. Can I ask as well to share your details, because a lot of people are asking, can we have your details, please? So if you just put them on the group for everyone to see, if that's possible.
Is it to me, Benetta?
Yes, to you, Benetta.
Okay. I think I can stay for about 10 minutes for some few questions, then I can drop off.
Okay, then. Is there anyone
still
else?
got time?
Yeah. Is there anyone else who wants to ask Benetta questions before she goes to work? Gilbert, please. Oh, I'm supposed to then let you speak.
Hello.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I just want to find out everything that's being shared. Will I be able to get it in recording form, or I can only just be able to get the details shared on the group, or is it the WhatsApp group?
I have recorded the meeting. Yes, you will.
Oh, thank you. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm at work, so I've not been able to listen to everything.
That's fine. That's why I sent a link with a form on it, and it says Google. I think it's like one of these Google links where you then go into a shared drive and put your details. So if you could do that, please.
Okay, thank you. We'll definitely do that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
easier, because otherwise there are too many email addresses.
Okay.
Is there anyone else? Or Shamiso, please.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. That was quite an insightful presentation. Thank you. Is it Benita? Thank you so much. The question I have, you mentioned that the depend on the location, you really don't have a choice on location when it comes to certain products. What are the best products that you'd recommend for Zimbabwe per se? When we're talking of location, that you would probably be forced to look at Zim, like the given ones.
That's a good question.
I would think Zimtrade has listed quite a few commodities that we can produce. So I think our best way of consideration, which could be cheaper for farmers, is to look at ambient products. By ambient products, for example, I'm looking at the mango, dried mangoes. I have seen a process of dried mangoes happening in Zimbabwe, supplying to Dubai, and I've been to Holland and Barrett's. They are selling a packet of 100 grams of dried mangoes, which are going for £2.36 for 100 grams. So you can imagine times 10, which is about 12 pounds for a kg. Is it? I don't know. I don't know my maths. Sorry. But the reason why I said those ambient products, they cost you less in terms of trying to look for specialized transportation, refrigeration. You can bag your products, put in an ambient aeroplane. They can get to whichever market you want to. So those are one of those products. We've got a climate that is very good in tomato produce. So tomatoes, we do then value addition. We have a lot of food waste happening in Zimbabwe. Mbaremsika full of bins of rotten tomatoes. If we move into processing canned tomatoes, Ghana is receiving metrics and metrics of tons of tomatoes, puree supplied from China, and yet we've got the best climate in the world, one of the areas that's got the best climate to do tomato farming. You then do further processing, value addition. So that's another. So if you want to transport your canned tomatoes, again, you do not need special refrigeration. So try to think along of produce. So the best thing, if you cannot send as a whole product, when you're thinking of further processing, think of ambient produce, which are a low cost even for you to store on your factory, or if you're thinking of doing that, they're low cost, and then even low cost to transport. I hope that answers your question.
Shami, did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. To everyone else, I've also put my telephone number. So if you're finding it difficult to get the link, just WhatsApp me your full name and your email address. That's great. Thank you. I'm going to call on Farmer William now, if that's okay. Oh, sorry, just before we do that, let me just check if there was anyone that had their rain. Yes, Bali had his hand raised. Thank you.
I just comment. I just put my comment in the box. The previous speaker had referred to food security index, and I went on the website, but Zimbabwe is not listed. Is that because of no data on it, or is there other sources for where Zimbabwe sits in the food security index criteria?
So currently that's the most database. So this database, so you've got food security index, you've got horizon scans. These are government driven or company driven database. So it depends on how much data the local source provides to those motherboard. So it could be for Zimbabwe, we haven't got to that stage that we're collecting data locally for us to be providing to those that database. So your best point of your first point of contact will be the local Zimbabwean data, our food, our standard like Zimtrade. They should be able to direct you to where you can find such data in terms of where does Zimbabwe sit in the global, or how much data they're sharing with this big, because it's a global database, and it only depends, or is as accurate as the participation of that country, if you get what I'm saying. Like, for example, in the UK, we hear so many on telly, we hear so many food recalls, so many food issues, food safety. We have food unwrap being aired freely on online. We've got student journals which are published. So all these avenues are ways of collecting data, which is then fed to that database. So if Zimbabwe, we do not participate like that, if we do not share such food safety incidents or food quality incidents, the data will be very minimum.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. So is the optics, as you're a buyer in your current role and function, when you're looking at that food security index and you see Zimbabwe not appearing, from a buyer, does that actually make Zimbabwean farmers less viable for you, or do you see them any different? Because that's the optics I'm seeing it from. Because my understanding from your share out was the food security index is a very important tool for a buyer. Mm-hmm. So Zimbabwe not being there, does that make them any weaker or appear less viable?
They will not appear less viable, but they'll be very disadvantaged. Because so as a buyer, if I've got a database of supplies of countries to consider, so if my country is not there, what are the chances of me to think of Zimbabwe? Unless I have a specific farmer or a specific produce which I know can only be grown in Zimbabwe. So this is a feedback also to Zimtrade, to feedback to because they have got a foot in the government, that they need to participate on these platforms to feed in, because it opens, it makes the country known to the global, on the global market, on the database. Yes, we were in the 80s known, and you can appreciate back then such controls were not in place. And when only it started in the early 90s for the UK in the early 90s, and then it's Zimbabwe, we're still catching up on our food safety. So this could be a message to the Zimtrade to push that we have such data available, because this shows you've got nothing to hide. If yes, we might have political issues, but we are producing safe food, quality food. We have those in-feeds, and it's not only about bad reporting, we also have those good reports on that database as well.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's just great to hear from an insider. And, you know, if I may highlight, actually, Beneta is actually Zimbabwe. Well, she was born in Zimbabwe. She's probably British now, but she was born in Zimbabwe. So it's always very exciting because she knows us, you know, as Zimbabweans, what we're like, our markets, our food. And thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I will be able to pass on her details. As I say, just WhatsApp me or fill in that database form. For now, I am going to actually ask our farmer who's going to share his testimony and his, I guess, his whole journey. This is somebody who actually has been a buyer himself. I think he's done so many things. Anyway, he'll be able to share with you what he's done and what he's currently working on at the moment. So if I can call on Farmer William to come and speak to us. I have lost my colleague, so you'll have to bear with me if I'm not very good at all this tech stuff. She's gone. So I think Farmer William, I have unmuted you, I think. Oh, there you are. Yes, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, and good day to everybody. It's a privilege to talk to you. My name is William Zirebwa. I've been working in the horticultural industry for the past 20 years, where I've been privileged to get quite a lot of insight and knowledge, experience as well into the industry. I've been privileged to work across the whole value chain, from the commercial side, logistics, farming side, standard side, and also pack house and production side. So I have had this privilege over the past 20 years. And I've also had some regional experience that I will share with you. In terms of where I can categorize myself, from my experience, I can say I'm an agribusiness professional. I'm also a horticulturalist. I'm a business development practitioner, especially with regards to horticulture, although I have worked in other value chains, but my area of specialization has always been horticulture. I also do business development. I work with development organizations. At the moment with TechnoSafe, where I actually lead country programs. And someone talked about Nespresso. I'm actually privileged that I'm also leading that. You can see this Nespresso capsule. It's a project that we have successfully launched in Zimbabwe in partnership with Nespresso. So I've got some practical experiences when it comes to export, when it comes to aggregation and integrating smallholder farmers, and also at the same time when it comes to scaling up startups and working with large-scale commercial farmers and integrating the smallholder farmers into their supply chains. So that's a brief about my profile and the areas where I've worked. In terms of country profiles, I started my career in Zimbabwe in 2000 with one of the established and first exporters. Unfortunately, it liquidated for the reasons that most of us know. And I've also worked in Mozambique. I spent about 10 years in Mozambique, where I was involved in the establishment of a fresh produce organization. I've also worked in Kenya with leading exporters as well. So I've got a very good knowledge of the horticultural sector in Kenya. I've done some work in Nigeria in horticulture, and in Zambia as well. I've collaborated with quite a number of South African companies because of the work that I do, and Malawi as well. So I've got some bit of good basic and also advanced knowledge of the horticultural supply chains from Africa. And in terms of the experience, as I said, my foundation, I started at Hortico in 2000. And Hortico is the first fresh produce exporter from Zimbabwe, or I can say it was the first fresh produce exporter from Zimbabwe. And the establishment of Hortico was in 1986. And at that particular time, it was because of the relationship of the owner or the founder with Marks and Spencer. So the business was established on the basis of the relationship with Marks and Spencer. And from that relationship, the packing was very straightforward. It was direct, and it was peas, and the peas were packed under shades, under trees to begin with, without any cooling, and immediately after packing on the same day to the airport and to the UK. That was how the business was established. And after some years, it grew organically, started having outgrowers as well. And for those who are in the know-how with regards to the Zimbabwean landscape, Mitchell & Mitchell's, which is in Marondera, is now called Nimbe, was one of the outgrowers. So there was that organic growth. And from Mitchell & Mitchell, you ended up with Kondozi as well. That started as an outgrower for Mitchell & Mitchell. So you can tell that there was an organic growth and how these businesses were established. They didn't just start as big businesses, but they grew as the market and demand was growing, and they were able to establish systems starting from farming and then to value addition before they ended up being large organizations with professional management structures, but having started with a farming structure or a farm setup. So because of my experience and also the basis of the organization, which gave me the opportunity to kickstart my career, we had a strong relationship with Marks and Spencer, which meant about 80% of the products that were packing around 2000 to 2004, 2005 were for Marks and Spencer. So 80% of the products were for Marks and Spencer, and 80% of those products were prepared products, that is ready to eat. This is something that Zimbabwe is missing. There is only, I think, 1 or 2 packhouse facilities or packing facilities that have got those value-adding infrastructure. So it's very important to have that in Zimbabwe, especially if we are to grow, because it also broadens the basket that we can offer to the markets. The other thing that I've also experienced over the years is that the markets will not want 1 product or 2 products. They will give you a program if you can supply them with a product which might be difficult for you to grow, but which you might be able to grow. So those are some of the conditions that we need to understand and appreciate when you get into the export market. And in terms of the markets that I've also worked with, we have had, of course, Marks and Spencer. I still keep the relationship with them. We also worked with Sainsbury's supermarkets. I will talk about them later as well. We have worked with Tesco. We've worked with Asda. I've worked with Morrison's, as well as Waitrose. And all those retail outlets in the UK have got different expectations in terms of quality, in terms of their pricing, and also in terms of their expectations with regards to specifications. So it's always very important to understand those specifications and that those retail outlets are in competition against each other. So it's very important to appreciate that. And in terms of the establishment, when I started at Hortico, as I said, it started as a single farm entity, but as demand grew, then Hortico established about 30 commercial farms that it was working with. And at one time, the products were also being imported from Zambia, just to make sure that we balanced the climatic conditions, regional requirements, and were able to get the products over a stretched season. And in terms of lines, we had more than 20 products, that is crops, that we were growing. Just to mention a few, manchtu, sugar snap peas, runner beans. Actually, when it comes to runner beans, Hortico Produce was the first African country to grow runner beans and export into the UK directly into Marks and Spencer. And they were the first to do the lighting programs for the runner beans because you need long day hours. So we can say as Zimbabwe, we were leading on that front. And I was privileged to be involved in some of the developments, even though they started way before I joined the organization. And other crops were broad beans, we had asparagus, we had quite a number of herbs. It's a big range of herbs, carrots, tenderstem broccoli, fine beans, strawberries, sweet potatoes. It was a good range, and butternuts. And in addition to that, we managed to establish an outsourced grower base, which involved smallholder farmers. And we had 3,000 smallholder farmers from Murewa area, Uzumba, that Maramba Fungwe area, Domboshawa, around Goromonzi, and they were mainly growing baby corn, sugar snap, and manchtu peas, also butternut. We introduced butternut into Zimbabwe, and it's now like a common commodity, but it was introduced for stir fries that we're exporting mainly to Marks and Spencer, and is now a well-known and established product in Zimbabwe. So we're quite privileged to have a firm foundation and to pioneer quite a number of activities in Zimbabwe. And smallholder farmers, those 3,000 smallholder farmers were an integral part of the business. And because of that, we actually had an independent structure that was responsible for managing those smallholder farmers. And it also had its own business entity as a standalone business unit. And we used to call it Agri-Systems, with its offices based in Murewa. So those were some of the activities that we were doing. And we're actually privileged, as for myself as well, because when standards were introduced, that is Global Gap, BRC standards for the pack houses, I was already established in the business. And we pioneered certifications in Zimbabwe. And I was leading on that front, although currently I'm no longer involved in certifications, but I've got that appreciation since we did the pioneering work with regards to certifications. And also because we had a prepared facility, that is a high care unit, we're able to prepare ready-to-eat products, like I said, which will give you a cutting edge in terms of the range of products that you are able to supply to the market. And unfortunately, at the moment, Kenya is actually leading, and it took over that business when it comes to presentation of prepared, ready-to-eat. These are convenient foods that a lot of markets would prefer. And after about 4 or 5 years with Hortico Produce, I had an opportunity to move to Mozambique, where I worked as a project manager and kickstarted a business which is called Vanduzi or Moz Foods, just across Mutare, about 100 kilometers from Mutare. We had a privilege to kickstart that business with a capital of about $15,000 US. Yes, $15,000 US. And we managed to convert a milk parlor into a packing facility. We managed to convince one of the farmers to do the production on his farm, something which he agreed, and to conduct the experiments. And we kickstarted the program, having engaged the markets that we're working with in Zimbabwe, and we started exporting to the UK about 2 tons of baby corn, chilies, and chilies weekly, and we moved into manchester peas and sugar snake peas. And at that particular time, we were also looking for investment since the founders did not have funds to scale up the business, but we had made and presented a good business case which could attract investment. And after about a year, we managed to secure an investor from the UK. Some of you maybe know Lord Sainsbury's. He invested through his foundation, Gatsby Foundation, and the business started growing with the first investment being about $2 million into the business. And we managed to establish our own production, establishing our own farms, getting certifications at the farms, and also at the same time building a packhouse facility. And by the time that I left Mozambique, the investment had grown to $35 million. And it was after 10 years. And we're supplying into the UK mainly, and EU as well, and into South Africa when it comes to the regional markets, and to some extent into Zimbabwe as well. And we also managed to tap into the local opportunity in Mozambique, as at the same time we had new industries emerging, especially the oil and coal industries, gas industries, northern Mozambique and in Tete. So we're able to tap into that Mozambican market, which was a local market, and also integrating smallholder farmers into the market. And in terms of standards, my friend Clarence is not available, but what we were doing, because a program has got to respond to market requirements. And market requirements is not just in terms of the products that you are supplying and quality, but it is also in terms of the standards that you need to comply with. And since we're supplying to Europe, we had standards that we were able to integrate. And we also had outgrowers, commercial farms, our own production, which had been established to 700 hectares of irrigated land, including greenhouse infrastructure. And we also had smallholder farmers, about 400 of them, having been integrated into that. So we also had to comply with standard requirements. And to farmers, when we are communicating standards, we didn't communicate that this is Global Gap, this is Tesco Nature, this is Marks and Spencer's Field to Fork, this is LEAF, that is linking the environment and farming, which is a standard for weight loss. So when we're working with farmers, ours was to produce an integrated standard, incorporating all those requirements. And when it came to certifications, we would identify a certification body which had accredited auditors who could come and conduct all those audits at the same time, not looking for one auditor who would do Marks and Spencer. Yes, Marks and Spencer would do their own audits on their own directly, and they were not charging for that. But when it comes to the other standards, like for example, your Global Gap, your Field to Fork, which is for Marks and Spencer, and your Tesco Nature, and linking the environment and farming, we were making use of one auditing firm with an accredited auditor who could conduct those audits. So at the end of the day, we were able to actually save on auditing costs, while it's at the same time not confusing the farmer with a cocktail of standards. So we just integrated them and established a single quality management system that we're able to communicate to the farmers. So standards can be confusing, but if you are able to interpret them well, then you can present those standards to the farmers in a way that the farmers are able to understand. And also one of the things that we also did was to look at the social standards as well. When you do your Global Gap, when you do your LEAF, there are minimum standards, and you don't get you don't get a premium when you do those standards. So when you're certified to Global Gap, most of the times you don't get a price difference when you are not certified. But when you have standards like, for example, fair trade or organic standard, then you get a premium standard which is above the market standard. So it's always important to know and to appreciate the difference and maybe the expectations that you may have with regards to the standards. And I've also worked, like I said, I've worked in Kenya. And when I was in Kenya, the main reason why I got there was the firm that I was working with had a challenge because Kenya has got an outgrower base, and most of the companies there were maybe buying or sourcing about 80% of their products from smallholder farmers. And those smallholder farmers were well established and developed. They could do their standards. They could also do aggregation. They could also apply for certifications independently. So they were well established. However, there are some weaknesses when you've got such an established smallholder farmer base, because they are also susceptible to chancers who come in. Like, for example, we had a lot of imitated products, that is pesticides that got into the Kenyan market, and they ended up making use of those products, cheaper products, but at the end of the day, they cost the Kenyan market quite a lot. And because of that, Kenya ended up with a challenge when it comes to pesticide residues. And because of that, they ended up being on red alert every time Kenya was exporting into the EU. And when you are on red alert, it means every consignment has got to be inspected and tested for pesticide residues. So the competitiveness of your market becomes compromised. And because of that, most of the companies in Kenya ended up changing that. And instead of having 80% of the products coming from the smallholder farmers, like the organization that I was engaged with, ended up starting with a strategy, because they had been suspended from exporting for about 4 months, which is significant. Remember, you will be having products, or you would be having contracts, because when you are in horticulture, most of the times you actually plant every day, Monday to Sunday. And just consider the losses that they incurred when they lost that significant market because of the suspension. After about 4 months, then they came up with a strategy that was presented to the market, and it was accepted. And the first thing was to start with 100% production, get farms, get irrigation infrastructure on farm, on production at 100%. And after that, we came up with a strategy where we had outgrowers, commercial farms, diluting the strategy into 90% production from commercial farms. And after that, we had about 10% again coming from smallholder farmers who we were able to control. So my role was to come up with that strategy. And when you look at the volume that we're moving, it was about 200 tons a week, with 100 tons being fine beans, and about 10 tons of runner beans, about 10 tons of tender stem broccoli, and another range of prepared products that we're moving. And I'm not including avocados, which we were also doing. And in season, it was almost about 300 tons per week that we were exporting. I was very privileged to have that exposure to work in Kenya and operate at that level. And I've also worked as a consultant with quite a number of companies in Kenya in fresh produce. One of the leading companies actually involved in avocado importation from Uganda, from Tanzania, and local sourcing within Kenya, and they are exporting into Europe. And they've recently invested into a $20 million packing facility. And these are Black people, farmers who have grown, who have had their businesses evolved. I've worked with about 20 exporters from Zimbabwe who have been exporting or are exporting in one way or the other. And I've been privileged to get and to gain that experience. And like I said before, I've worked with TechnoSafe, working with smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe. I've talked about Nespresso, where we've worked with about 300 farmers to start off with, and now we've got about 700 farmers growing coffee under a project that we are managing with funding from Nespresso. And when we are working, the main or minimum requirement is to have a private sector company. And in this particular case, it's Nespresso, which is investing its funds in order to revive coffee in Zimbabwe. And our role is to make sure that the farmers grow to the required quality and volume as well, and following the standards and expectations of the market. And this is a limited edition, very expensive coffee, and the farmers are getting value for their production. And in order for us to scale up and to involve other private sector companies, we've also partnered with Tanganda and Craig Valley, which are large-scale commercial farms or businesses involved in coffee, and they have also integrated them into the Nespresso program. And the other one, which is related